Brian May and his main girl for a long, long time, Red. So we wanted to have you discuss a little bit about your main guitar here. So tell us a little bit about when you first started to build this guitar. Was it something that you wanted to just build a guitar, or were there certain things that the guitars at the time you were playing didn't have that you needed?
The basic thing was I didn't have any money, so I couldn't buy any of those guitars. So I could look at them in brochures, you know, the Fenders and the Gibsons or whatever, even the Hofners, who were the sort of English copies, emulations of those, and I couldn't afford any of them. So it was like, make a guitar, and that's the only way.
Yeah.
So that was it. Having taken up the challenge, it was, let's make something better than anything that's ever been out there, you know, because both me and my dad had that kind of attitude. If it's worth doing to the max, you know. So it became a challenge to try and take the guitar a step forward. And in some ways I think we succeeded, partly by luck, partly by good design, but you know, there's a lot of things about this which became standard later on, which were our ideas. So I'm pretty proud of what we did, out of bits and pieces. As you know, it was made out of all sorts of stuff that was just lying around. I'm actually shocked myself that it's still here. And it's been around the world I don't know how many times now, you know, but she still works. And, you know, with very little maintenance really, except a bit of refinishing by Greg Fryer a few years ago. But yeah, it's never been refretted. I've never had to take the tremolo off to do it. I've never had to replace, well, we replace rollers when they fall off, but never had to replace the unit. So here it is.
And after you built this, you feel like you kind of obviously got it right the first time. Did you ever aspire to build more guitars, or once you finally perfected this, you were like, that's it?
Yeah, well, I didn't have time. That's the truth after that. But yeah, we designed a couple of others, one of which was a kind of lozenge-shaped guitar, which actually Andrew Guyton has made for me now. It's kind of spade-shaped, which is fun. It's sort of the opposite to the thing that Brian Jones used to play. You know, the spade's the other way around. That works pretty well. And actually, originally I designed this with an F-hole and you know, like a proper semi-acoustic, but I never got around to doing that, and it was too difficult, to be honest, with the technology I had, because it was all hand tools. But recently Andrew Guyton made us one of those. Did you see that?
Yeah.
An arch top, which is beautiful, and it has a pickup in the bridge, so it sounds pretty authentic, acoustic. No, this is the only guitar really that I made and functioned with, and it became a part of me.
What, looking back now, you have all these years of hindsight. Obviously, the decisions you made designing worked, but was there anything that you're like, looking back, you know, had I known something now, I maybe would have tweaked this a little bit with maybe a electronics or a bridge setup or something like that?
No, there isn't really. It had a few tweaks along the way, but really nothing radical. I mean, for instance, I changed the polarity of these pickups so that these two would humbuck when they were in the position that I usually use, when they're in series, in phase. And I arranged it so that when these two were out of phase, they humbuck, which is something pretty unusual. But that's because I use them out of phase a lot, like in the Bohemian Rhapsody solo. So these humbuck in that position. So that entailed turning, I forget which one, turning one of these upside down and changing the polarity. Apart from that, you know, there's been so little ever done to this. You know, most of the decisions I would stick by now, the fact that we've got pretty much zero friction here because of the rollers, we've got pretty much zero friction here because the strings go almost straight through, which is very unusual, laterally and vertically, and they're located vertically by the 0 fret. And this nut has no bottom to it, so they float in the vertical space on the nut. And that works really well too. Oh yeah, the only other thing we changed would be machine heads because they wore out. But actually these are much better than the machine heads I originally put on.
Are those locking tuners?
They lock, yeah, which does make a big difference, I have to say. They're nice. I think they're shallows. You know, but most of this is homemade with bits and pieces. Yeah, you know, the neck is Pete probably told you, is a piece of an old fireplace, which was 100 years old at the time, and you can just about see the wormholes that I filled up with matchsticks here. This was all done with hand tools. There's a very solid piece of oak, which is the main strain bearer of the guitar in here, but it's enveloped in veneer, and the main part of the body is hollow, and that's made out of block board covered with veneer. Can't speak. can't speak.
So we were talking a little bit earlier, and we kind of sussed out that it was about 63, 64 when you were building this. You're about 17. Took you about 2 years.
Yeah.
So what was that first gig like when you finished it? You and your dad, you had this. It worked, and you get up on stage and you hit it. Did the lights and whistles and bells chime off, or were you like, oh, we're not done yet? You know.
It was pretty amazing. You know, it was a dream come true. I had been kind of playing it all along at home, you know, as it progressed. But I think the first time it was ever used was at Molesey Boat Club, which is on the banks of the Thames somewhere near Putney, in England. And my group was 1984, and I got up and played it, and it was amazing. It was quite stupendous, and that became my instrument from that day forward. It worked. We were, you know, a lot of our dreams came true, and still does.
And so we have obviously the selectors down here for on and off and out of phase. What are some of your favorite settings for this, or some favorite solos when you're playing live?
Well, these are the on-off switches here, off, on, for this pickup, that pickup, and that pickup, and these are the phase switches, as you say. That was an innovation. Nobody had done that at the time, and very few people have now, actually, in fact. A few people took up the design. Basically, my favourite home bass is these two in phase. So it's those two are down and those two are down. This is off. That gives me my basic sort of a great chord sound with the AC30s, and also quite a bit of fatness. Great for soloing. It's great for almost everything, depending on where the volume control is. And of course, the AC30s with the treble booster, as I use them, are kind of infinitely variable as regards saturation. They distort incredibly beautifully, smoothly. So I can find little positions on here where the chords are still clean, but it will sustain. So this is a nice configuration. These two together is fat, very kind of plummy. And I use that just for the very beginning of Bohemian Rhapsody when it's live here. But I very quickly flick them out of phase for the solo, and that gives this real screech, because that's this position. These two down, so these two pickups are on. One's down and one's up. There's a redundancy. I mean, they can be like this or they can be like that, which may make a difference in some places. Yeah, but they're out of phase and they're humbucking, so there's not too much extraneous noise, which can be a real problem, as you probably know. And they scream. I mean, you just hit them. It obviously helps if you hit somewhere down here, but basically you get such a high cancellation of the fundamental and such an enhancement of those high harmonics that it screeches, it just screams. So all these harmonics will just zoom out without much encouragement. You can encourage them as well, but it gives me that lovely kind of I don't know if I can even describe the sound, but it gives it that that Bohemian Rhapsody solo sound.
Yeah.
I guess. These two out of phase give a real kind of crunch. Now, logically, they should give you the most harmonic content in a way, because they're furthest away, and therefore their harmonic content will be the most different. And I use that for Stone Cold Crazy because it's just harsh, and it gives. Strangely enough, it does have a low end too. It has a kind of brown warmth to it as well, which is really good. So if I normally play with a heel of my hand on here, so if I damp it a little bit, that warmth will come out, and it's surprisingly good for soloing. So I use all these combinations. I use this one on its own for just a clang. You know, this gives you a lovely, rich, kind of uncoloured sound. So if I want chords to clang out, like in Now I'm Here, this is what I'll use, and then I can switch this one in once I'm doing the main riff. These two in phase, I don't use very much. It gives you a kind of a sound a bit like a Gibson 335, you know, that sweetness, which some of the blues players have liked, and I occasionally like it, but it's not me. It's too sweet for me. Just has a strange feeling to it. And these two out of phase, yeah, not very often. It doesn't really occur to me to use that.
But one day you'll find the right situation.
I mean, I deliberately used every single combination when we were recording Bohemian Rhapsody, just for fun.
Yeah.
You know, so every time you hear there's octaves and stuff, and I used every single combination for those, just to get the maximum amount of variation of colour.
And this is still, to this day, Pete was mentioning that, 98% of the show is on this guitar, unless you break a string or you need something for like a drop D tuning for a song.
Drop D is one thing and acoustic is another thing, but apart from that, it's this guitar.